Save the Semantics, episode 319. It is May 26th, 2025. My name is Myro. This is the podcast where I ramble on for a bit about some shit. Recording this on Memorial Day, U.S. Memorial Day, on a Monday here. So I had the day off today, which was nice. Kind of a nice little surprise, if you will. I mean, I saw it coming, so it's not really that much of a surprise, but it's just, it's nice. It's nice to have that. Yeah. So I wanted to. It's been a while since I've like dove into gaming related stuff. Both gaming, both like gaming news slash gaming kind of topics. I've done reviews last year regarding some of the games that I have played. And obviously I've talked about this, how I just, this year has been a bit of a slower year for me, in terms of my gaming output. I just haven't had the same time commitment to be able to complete games and that kind of thing. And I've just had other interests that have kind of taken my focus away. But I just wanted to spend like a little time talking about specifically roguelike games, because honestly that's been kind of my main, that's been really my main genre choice for gaming recently, outside of obviously obviously JRPGs, RPGs, that kind of thing. That will always be kind of my, sort of my favorite go-to. But in terms of like the type of game that I've put in just the most amount of hours into as of like the last few years, it's got to be roguelike games. I talked about this, I mentioned this sort of briefly, how I picked up Rogue Legacy 2. I've been sort of meaning to get into that. I was a little, my sort of hesitancy was the fact that I already have quite a handful of roguelike games, and I was wondering if this would maybe be a bit redundant, but it has its own qualities. It has its own gameplay style and mechanics and stuff that very clearly differentiates itself from the other games that I have played. I would say within just sort of the core concept of these games that I enjoy, there is something about them that kind of clicks with me. There is like a certain itch that this specific like genre scratches. And I talked about this in relation to, games that I've played in the past, where there is sort of like this repetitive nature of sorts, where you're sort of repeating the same actions and just sort of learning and just having a better understanding of the mechanics and that kind of thing. And that just sort of goes with like any skill, kind of like, if you're like exercising, it's sort of like, if you're repeating the same exercise, then you sort of are exercising that muscle and working it better. And it just sort of works with, I don't know, it just kind of works with my brain. I do think like another big aspect of why it's sort of why this genre of game has kind of resonated with me over the past little while now is how like quick, like the quickness of each run and the ease by which I'm able to kind of get into a new run without like too much, there's not really a whole lot of overthinking. Like I don't have to like contemplate like, man, if I do this, is it going to take up like my entire afternoon? That kind of thing. It's not that at all. Runs, depending on which game, but I would say typically runs can last, I don't know, like 15 minutes, maybe, like at least, the ones that, I would say maybe Risk of Rain 2 is sort of the exception to that, where a full run can, be like an hour plus. But even then, that's like not like exactly the longest gaming session, you know what I mean? Like that's not too bad. And I think for myself, someone, I do value my time, and I also work full time too. So I do, I have, as I have kind of progressed into, just getting older and all that stuff, I have definitely am sort of like prioritizing and thinking about what makes the best use of my time and that kind of thing, right? I don't ever really like to think about like, optimizing my, quote unquote, optimizing my hobbies and that kind of thing, but it is important to consider the time that you do have. And I like the fact that, these games generally, I can't spend a handful of time, like a handful amount of like hours and stuff, because I just enjoy playing them. But overall, it's not like this time sink. It's not this like commitment. The games don't ever really require you can do kind of what you want. There's ways you can modify the rules. You can make it as easy as possible for yourself. You can make it as hard as you can by, putting different like stipulations, to challenge yourself. So I think the sort of the quality of life aspect of it sort of lends itself to, whatever degree that you want to, experience the game. And I think it's just it's just so easy to kind of like get into them that I don't really have to think too much about like the outside aspect of this like time commitment. I do think about that in regards, because like I sort of know what to expect going into it too. You know what I mean? In regards to like certain RPGs, and here's the thing, that's kind of it's been something that I've been thinking about, how I have become a little hesitant to like play and get into new longer games because of the time that it takes to complete them, right? I'm perfectly fine and happy to delve like, 100 plus hours into something like, Xenoblade X and other RPGs and that kind of thing. But I have to be a little bit more, I don't know, I have to be a little bit more, I have to be aware of my choices, I think, because I do think about that. Like, I'm like, I don't want to, there is kind of this little bit of a sunk cost fallacy type of thing, which I've talked about before, and I have gotten better about, simply just kind of dropping something that I haven't necessarily enjoyed. And, maybe this is something that I haven't necessarily been super, like, I haven't expressed this because I haven't played this game in a while, but Final Fantasy 12 was kind of like, I put in maybe like 5-6 hours, and I talked about this, that I'll probably get back into it. This might be just like another case of like similar to what I did with Triangle Strategy, where I put that game off for like 2 years before getting back into it. So this might be kind of like a similar situation. But like I if I'm not necessarily getting like the most enjoyment, or just just not having the most fun with a game, I think that I'm becoming a lot more accepting of really just putting that down. You know what I mean? Because there's plenty of stuff out there, and again, I can always go back to it, right? I can always, if there's a part of me that really wants to get back into Final Fantasy 12, which I do want to play through a lot of the mainline Final Fantasy games, like, 8, and 12, 13, the kind of the originals, the ones from, the SNES era, like those kinds of, those other games, in the series. Like I do want to play through all of them, but I also am aware of the time, commitment as well, right? So I don't know. I think, and listen, here's the thing. You can make the argument that the amount of time that I put into the games that I do play could be put into, JRPGs and, RPGs, so that I could like really work through that. But I also am trying to be a little bit more, I want to continue to sort of broaden my gaming kind of library and horizon. And I know this is sort of ironic because I'm talking specifically about like roguelikes, but there are unique characteristics with each of these games, that I have played. There is like a different type of, there's a different type of gameplay loop. There's certain quirks that each of them kind of employ that I think is unique and just kind of fun to learn. They challenge me in different ways, right? Slay the Spire, I think I saw there was like a comment that was talking about how it's actually kind of like a math problem in a lot of ways, right? Like, sure, there are like, the different attributes and relics that you pick up, do matter in terms of, the damage output and that kind of thing. And maybe at a certain point, it doesn't matter how much damage you're doing, because it's just such, it's at such a high level. But ultimately, like, it is like kind of this mathematical equation where you're trying to figure out the most like efficient way to defeat enemies without taking damage yourself, right? And I just think that's really, I don't know, it's turn-based combat with cards, but there's a little bit more levels to, you have to think about, the different routes that you have to take. Like there's other kind of puzzly aspects to it that, that's there's a reason why it's kind of become one of my favorite games, right? And then and then you look at something like Risk of Rain too, which is just kind of pure, just like, shooting, third person action shooting. But each of the different characters have their own gameplay style. Some of them are a bit less mobile and slower. So you have to be like methodical in, the weapons that you use and how you use them and that kind of thing. And then sort of like the items that you pick up will also determine, how you're going to go about playing as well. So there are so many different, I don't know, each, it is just not, it's never like copy paste formulas of these roguelikes, like at least the ones that I've played, right? I mean, Rogue Legacy 2 is like a 2D platformer. Risk of Rain 2, as I mentioned, is a third person, action shooter. Monster Train, it is like a card based roguelike game, deck builder game, but it is kind of more like a tower defense style type of gameplay versus, Slay the Spire, which is, your single character, that kind of thing, right? So there's so many different gameplay types and all that. And so there's just an abundance of different ways of going about it. There's like another card, like deck builder game that I've recently looked into, which is called Wild Frost, and that looks really fun. It looks very, very colorful, and it just looks like a kind of like an inviting game. And I if it goes on sale, I'll probably pick it up. But that's the other thing too that I want to kind of express. I like the aesthetic of roguelike games. Like, generally, it's a lot of them are created by like indie studios. And so there is sort of like a concentrated art direction. There's sort of this colorfulness in both the art style and sort of in the gameplay as well, right? So I think that kind of lends itself to how like how playful, I guess you want to call it, roguelikes can be, and how they sort of generally are. They don't like. I feel most of them, maybe of course I'm sure there's exceptions to that rule, but they don't take themselves seriously, right? Like within, the mechanics of the world that they're a part of, like they know they lean into sort of like the silliness of it. They lean into the fact that this is very much a game. And you see it in kind of Rogue Legacy 2, where the characters, whoever you sort of pick can pick up different attributes that might be like detrimental, but can also be kind of funny, right? So, you could have a character that has, it's like old timey kind of like, I don't know, vision or whatever, where the screen or whatever, is like black and white. You got other ones where, your character is just like huge. They're just like massive. There's just so many different kinds of, things that can kind of hinder your ability to play. So it's either, you can kind of work through your way. You can work your way through with whatever, detrimental aspects that might exist. But there's also kind of like you also have the ability to earn more gold as well. So that's kind of like the payoff for playing a more difficult game style, if you want to call it that. And here's the thing about these games is they do present, some lore, some backstory, so that kind of thing, which you have the choice of, engaging with it if you want. In my perspective, I think it's those kinds of things like lore, backstory, whatever. These are not things that I'm, super concerned or worried about. These are kind of like secondary in my opinion, at least in terms of like, in terms of this game, right? And in comparison to other games, RPGs or whatever, the story and everything, that's like the most, that's one of the most important parts for me personally. But it just is not like, it's there for you to engage with it as you see fit, but you don't really have to, you know what I mean? So I think like, I don't know, there's a lot of, I think there's just like a sense like it's possible that I just happen to like roguelikes, you know what I mean? And there's not really this necessary way to kind of articulate why I like it, but I like to do that. It's like, it's fun to try and like figure out your brain sometimes, it just might be the case of, hey, I like this for some particular reason, in the same way that I like other things, but I do think that there is a specific element of roguelikes that I think is worth highlighting. I think they're kind of this reminder, at least to myself, that all of this is kind of video games, whatever. You can take it as seriously as you want, which I do. I do, consider games to be a form of art that is worth analyzing and worth, just kind of figuring out detail, at least ones that have a bit more of an in-depth story and those kinds of things. I think that type of analysis is important, and I like conducting that when I can. But roguelike games, I think, are sort of a reminder that this is all just kind of play. This is all ultimately for fun. It's really something that I've been able to use to kind of take my mind off of whatever is going on. it's kind of it's both simultaneously kind of both comfort food and something that can kind of challenge me, something that I can kind of work, use my brain a little bit to try to figure out the best path moving forward in Slay the Spire, whether it's like worth risking trying to go for another relic or whatever, just to get another, potential like stat boost versus, taking the safer path and guaranteeing, a way to heal and all these other kinds of things, you know what I mean? And there's a sort of value kind of proposition that the games within, the in-game, within the game it sort of proposes and how you approach things and kind of the risk reward sort of system that these types of games employ. So there's that kind of like challenge to it where it sort of gets your brain working. And I really appreciate that. I really think it's just it's really suited me. And I think it's become one of my favorite genres, at least, for within this kind of era of my, I don't know, gaming adventure, if you want to call it that. Where, it's not something that I've really previously, delved into. It's not something that I've previously enjoyed necessarily, right? I mean, it's just not like a game in my childhood that I can really think of that fits within the confines of this type of game. But I'm really glad that I've stumbled across this, at least over the course of the last 4 or 5 years or so. Because it's really, it's been good. It's been really fun. And there's just it feels like there's just like an endless array of different types of roguelike games. And I know that some people feel that it's been maybe run into the ground a little bit, but I feel like I've just barely scratched the surface. I feel that I've been lucky with the types of roguelike games that I've picked up and played, but I do think that there are other ones out there that can kind of fit, that I can kind of still enjoy my time with in a different way, other roguelike games that are a little separate from what I'm kind of familiar with, you know what I mean? And also I think it's another reminder that if I'm able to pick up and get into this genre, that it means that I'm kind of capable, and I feel that I'm comfortable getting into other genres that I'm not super familiar with either, right? Sometimes as I said before, I've said this before, about something like Dark Souls, where I do want to try to give it a second chance, right? And who knows? We'll see how that goes. There are instances where sometimes certain games are just like, nah, I actually just, unfortunately I just don't like it, right? And that might be the case with Dark Souls, but I still haven't given that a fair shot. And so I think having this kind of experience, it's just sort of affirming to me that I can continue to just broaden my horizon and just try all sorts of different types of games out there, right? And also understanding that it's okay if I don't like that, you know what I mean? But I think it's worth trying, because you never know what you might find. I think in terms of games that I've just sort of been, I don't know, that I've sort of gotten on impulse, those have worked out well in my favor, but sometimes it might not. So, but it is just kind of this sense that I can continue to find new game types and new genres out there, and that's exciting. That's really exciting, and I think that roguelike games, the ones that I've played especially, are sort of a testament to that. So it's just exciting knowing that there's so much out there on top of the games that I already want to play, that I know that I want to play, that I might find a potential kind of hidden gem that I had no idea about, that I just maybe learned about recently. I mean, Balatro is one game where I just, I bought on a whim because I heard some murmurings. This was before it kind of blew up. I bought it like almost on release, and I don't regret it at all. Right? It was one of my most played games last year, and also I'm waiting on the update. I think that's gonna come next month, like halfway through the year. So I'm excited to see. I've talked about this, but I'm excited to see what the potential updates are gonna be. But yeah, it's just it's cool. There's just a whole wide world out there, and I'm eagerly, just depending on time and whatnot, I'm eagerly wanting to kind of dive into that. And I have some games on my list in terms of, outside of the ones that I'm already playing and outside of the ones that I had sort of, put on my list and that I've expressed before, that I want to talk about. I kind of want to do, depending on, again, if I have any thoughts on certain, especially like story-based games. I want to get back to doing a bit more of like a deeper analysis, because it's been a while. I think the last one I did was it's been a minute. Like I can't even remember. Was it Final Fantasy X? I that's the one I distinctly remember talking about in depth for at least like a few episodes, and I kind of want to do something like that, even if it is for a shorter game. So that's also kind of on my docket as well. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of express some stuff, because I've been, I've been wanting to dive back into games more, just putting a bit more into that, because I haven't really done so. I've been missing that a little bit, yeah, I want to play games that have a bit more meat to them too, right? And so, I have games that have more kind of a focus on story and that kind of thing, and there are some things, I still feel like I have a bit of a ways to go with Xenoblade X, because I haven't really progressed it a ton. I don't know how. I need to, I'll probably take a look to see how much more longer I have with the main story and that kind of thing. I do want to try to do, I guess do the most to round out and, do not exactly 100%, because that sounds like it's work, but do a lot to fill out the map and those kinds of things. So that's kind of that's something that I'm considering. But yeah, other story games and other things like that, I think it's I want to dive back into that and talk about that and share my thoughts on those things, because I think that's fun. I think it's a fun thing to do. So yeah, that's gonna just be just a little spiel today. I'll obviously talk about the conference finals, depending on the results of today's game of the Thunder and the Timberwolves. I'll talk about that tomorrow, or maybe Wednesday. We'll see how that goes. But yeah, just a little gaming talk today, and yeah, that's gonna do it for this episode. Thanks for listening as always. This has been Save the Semantics, signing off.